Hi there, my little tangerines. Thank you so much for joining me here on my channel for this video about reparenting the inner child. This is a topic that is very near and dear to my heart. There's a lot of emotion attached to this subject for me because this particular area of self-development and emotional healing has been so much a part of my own journey, my own life path. I want to thank my patrons for selecting this particular video topic for their video of the month in the video poll. Every single month I give my doll faces and Pop-Tarts over on Patreon the opportunity to select one of the pieces of content that I will be making for YouTube. And this particular one came out on top for this month's poll. And to be honest with you, when I realised that this one was coming out ahead and it might possibly win, I was a little bit nervous. I was excited, but I was also nervous just because, as I said, there's a lot of strong emotion around this topic for me. So I'm not sure if I'm definitely going to get through it without shedding any tears, but we will see. There's a lot to get through, and just to let you darlings know that from now on I am going to be timestamping my videos, leaving the list of the timestamps either in a pinned comment or in the down bar below, so that you guys can actually see what the order of business is for the longer videos, and so that you can skip anything you're not interested in, and likewise you can go back and you can re-watch things using the timestamps if you want to take the information in again. I've noticed more and more people doing this, especially on the commentary channels that I watch, and I thought that would be a really nice thing to do, and it would be pretty easy to do. So the timestamping from now on, my darlings, will be a gift from me to you. For a very long time now on my personal journey, I have recognised that some of the responses that I have to things and some of the behaviours that I exhibit in certain situations are not really indicative of the most current and up-to-date version of myself. So in my sort of mid-20s, when I really started to dig down into what a lot of my problems were, what a lot of the recurring themes were, a lot of the pain I was going through and stuff like that at that time, I realised, okay, some of the things that I think and feel and fear, etc., are coming from old versions of me. And that just really started to make more and more sense to me. It wasn't that I came across a particular book about inner child work and everything clicked. It was much more intuitive than that for me. I just really started to recognise that certain aspects of my character were certainly sort of moulded by and informed by the 6-year-old version of me or the 15-year-old version of me. And I could actually start to identify different sort of clusters of responses and fears, etc., and actually pin them to a specific age or a specific sort of time in my life. So a specific collection of years in my life. And I started to find that really interesting. And then I did start to learn about inner child work, and I started to read articles, and I started to talk to my mum about some things that she'd read about inner child work and work that she had done with therapists on the inner child. And I thought, wow, there is really something to this. And so that was where I started to begin my journey with inner child work. It was only later that I came across the term reparenting, and I can't for the life of me remember where I came across this term. I can't remember where I first read it. All I can tell you is that during my 20s, I was balls deep in lots of popular psychology books. And by popular psychology, I mean psychology for the layman rather than for the academic. So you get these books, you know, that break things down more for somebody who's not part of that field, but is very interested, kind of thing. And I was reading a lot of that stuff, a lot. So, you know, I sort of started to build on these ideas about reparenting. It really did make intuitive sense to me anyway, because, for example, in my mid-20s, I started to realise that I was working very hard for validation and acceptance, working overtime for those things and wanting to be perceived in a certain way. And I recognised that that was all linked back to issues surrounding my relationship with one of my principal caregivers growing up, expectations and typecasting that I dealt with in the family environment, the way that things were set up, some of the things I learned and some of the experiences that I had. And I started to associate that push for validation and that concern about how I was perceived. I started to link that to a 6-year-old version of me. The reason I link it to a 6-year-old version of me is because I think I was around that age when I have a very specific memory of a certain family event that I was at where it was very performative for me and I was trying to get the attention of one of my principal caregivers. I think I might have been more like 8, but I've always described it as 6-year-old me, so that's kind of where it stuck. So it started to make sense to me that if I went through all of this conditioning around getting validation, impressing the adults, living up to expectations, then no doubt my current version of me is responsible for retraining that part of me inside that's still seeking that validation, reparenting that part of me to show that part of me that, you don't need to go searching for validation and trying to live up to expectations, so it kind of made sense to me. And I would think to myself, whenever I would read the word reparenting, I would think, well, yeah, that makes sense that I have to reparent that part of me. Similarly, I have a kind of 15-year-old version of me. When I think of her, she's wearing specific clothes and accessories that I owned at around that age. Her bedroom looks like the bedroom I had at that age. That was a very tumultuous, very difficult age for me, for various reasons. And some of the responses and the emotions and the behaviors that I exhibit that tend to be problematic and painful are very much connected to a lot of the experiences and the training, I suppose you could say, that I had at the age of 15. And so sometimes when I feel a certain way, when I respond a certain way, when I have certain fears or paranoias, I instantly connect that to, this is the 15-year-old version of me. And the 15-year-old version of me, just like the 6-year-old version and just like other versions that I can see in my behavior and my personality, they all have different agendas, right? So the 15-year-old version of me is interested in a very different thing to the version of me at my current age and in my current circumstances. The 6-year-old version of me too has different aims, a different agenda. So 6-year-old me wants to get the validation, live up to the expectations, have the applause of the people that she considers to be superior, do the little dance to get the reward kind of thing. Current version of me doesn't want to do that and recognizes that that can be problematic, and it's also a massive waste of energy. And so 6-year-old version of me has a very different idea of what is the most important thing. And I recognize that, it's a valid part of me, but it's I don't want that part of me to be in the driver's seat all the time. The 15-year-old version of me, she wants everybody to fuck off. She just wants to feel safe. She wants to feel secure. She wants to be alone. She wants to be able to shroud herself. And she sometimes does want to kind of dwell on her pain and be with her pain and go into a sort of dark tunnel of thoughts. But really, she wants to be assured, and she wants to be safe, and she wants to be left to her own devices. She's afraid, and she will lash out because she is afraid, and she wants to show people not to challenge her. So that's her agenda. Current version of me doesn't have that agenda anymore. But I am aware that inside of me, the 15-year-old version of me has that motivation and that agenda and that perspective. So again, it sort of stood to reason for me that, like, yeah, okay, I need to go in and I need to negotiate with that 15-year-old version of me. I need to talk to her. I need to explain to her that things are different now and it's okay. And she doesn't have to be defensive and uptight and afraid, right? So it made sense to me that, like, yeah, you've got to sometimes negotiate with these other selves that are motivated by quite different things to the current version of you. The parenting that I received could be described as a little bit haphazard. Some parts of it were incredible, but the reality is that 3 out of the 4 primary caregivers that were the most responsible for me and had the most influence on me experienced heinous upbringings, and they were not actively dealing with those traumas or really acknowledging them very much. They were just suppressing them, swallowing them down, and just getting on with life. And in a lot of ways, pretending that those terrible things hadn't happened. Now, for anybody who understands what the term transgenerational trauma means, you will understand that even with my own traumas and difficult experiences aside, I was being raised with that in my parenting, in the parenting style that I was experiencing. My parentage was fraught with trauma and unresolved issues. And so already there was all of that sort of influence in my life, and certainly that had an effect. Some of my experiences of being parented and being guided by adults was awful, frankly. And so, there's things to unpick. You have to look at the tapestry that was sewn at these certain points in your life and say, okay, I could go in now and I could take responsibility for being my own parent. Let me teach that version of me something different. Let me put something else into the tapestry. And that's what I decided to seek to do. If you're listening to this and you're thinking, well, my parenting was pretty great, I mean, I don't have that many complaints. I really did have a reasonably good upbringing. That doesn't mean that you wouldn't benefit from reparenting work. Sometimes reparenting can be about teaching yourself something different to what the society around you is teaching you. I think reparenting can be much bigger than just actually changing some of the things your parents taught you. It can be about teaching yourself something different than what the family dynamic insisted upon for you. It can be about giving yourself a different experience or different ideas around an experience that you had. So I think it can be broader. And I think even when one did have a great childhood and a reasonably sturdy parenting, there can be certain experiences that can leave a nasty taste, and you can think to yourself, okay, on the whole, my parenting was good and my experience growing up was good, but this particular situation or this cluster of instances has been causing issues. So there certainly could be a value to reparenting for you. I think it's a bit different for everybody. There may have been one significant caregiver that gave you crappy messages or, just really sort of bad psychological training. For example, let's just say, I'll just pull an example out of the air. Let's say that your maternal grandmother often body shamed you. And whenever you went to stay with her, whenever you had dinner there or whatever, there was body shaming involved. So looking at all of the responsibility that was taken for you by all of the parental templates and the adults around you that were of consequence, you could say, okay, most of it was all right, and I don't really think I have a lot of reparenting to do, but these issues that I had with my maternal grandmother have left their mark and they've affected the way I feel about my body and about food and everything else. And then you might choose to look at that and expand it outwards and say, how was my young psyche being influenced, guided and parented and shepherded by the posters that I was seeing, the movies that I was seeing, the talk in the schoolyard that I was experiencing? So there may also sort of be additional reparenting duties that you want to take on there, where you decide, okay, I'm going to go into my psyche and I'm going to start sort of re-sewing that part of the tapestry. And it's not to say that you can turn back time and do things differently. Obviously, what affected you has affected you, and the training and conditioning you received is what you received. There's no way back. But I do think it's possible to say, okay, I acknowledge how this training, how these experiences, how this messaging affected me, and I want to take the opportunity to really zoom in on this part of the tapestry and give myself different ideas, different messages, different experiences, start to tell myself different things over and over again to kind of course correct from where I was when, for example, my maternal grandmother body shamed me. I would like to tell my inner child at that age something different. Parents and people that take on the role of parents, they're just people. They're not perfect. And I think even if they did largely a good job, they might have done something that was a little bit problematic for your personality type. They may have been dealing with their own triggers at a certain time, and so they kind of let the ball drop with a specific situation where they could have done better. And it's okay just to say to yourself, I do need reparenting there. That could have been dealt with better, and now I get to be the parent and I get to help myself deal with it. When we decide to reparent, I think what we're saying is that we want to make sure we're not listening over and over and over again to a message that came in from our parenting or from our guidance that really keeps having a negative effect on us and really may as well be changed, if possible, to something more positive. And again, I know that you can't completely unpick things from the tapestry that have already gone in, but you can start to kind of lay over, you can start to add things that are more positive and see if you can start to change the neural pathway over time. And it is very, very possible. I've done it myself. Now, before I start explaining some of the techniques that I've been using to reparent myself over the course of time, I want to talk about a few different reasons why people might reparent. And I want to talk about some of the different types of people that have gotten really good benefits from reparenting. I've spoken to so many clients about inner child work, connecting with the inner child at various different stages, or the inner adolescent, connecting with past versions of self, and how that links in with reparenting, how it links in with giving ourselves at various ages different experiences and different conditioning to the experiences and conditioning that was experienced in the literal past. And it's been really interesting for me. So I wanted to tell you about a few things I've observed. First of all, parentification is something that a lot of my clients have been through. When I have clients for sessions or readings and we talk about childhood, and I have the great privilege of being able to hold space for clients when they're talking about childhood, I've noticed that a lot of them have been through parentification. Parentification is basically where the child is forced to take on the role of the parent or the responsible older sibling. And it can happen for various different reasons. It can be because the parents are distant and absent or neglectful. It can be because the parents have mental health issues or serious illnesses. It can be for any number of reasons that the child may end up having to take on responsibilities that the adult ideally should be taking on. Parentification comes in two principal forms. First of all, emotional parentification, which is where you are a child, but you are effectively being your parent's counselor and space holder and advisor or supporter. And instrumental parentification, which is where you might not necessarily be needed for the emotional piece with your parents, but you will be needed to do things like make the dinner, put yourself to bed, get yourself dressed for school, those kinds of things. Take on this sort of the responsibilities of getting yourself together, putting yourself in the shower, cooking food, maybe that kind of thing. Very young, when really the responsible adult should be still taking on those duties. Someone who experienced parentification can sometimes grow up to be a chronic overgiver and feel like it's always their responsibility to make sure that everybody else has space held for them or has dinner cooked for them, because that was your training from early on. So reparenting is sort of giving that part of you inside that is taking on that responsibility and perhaps feeling alone in the world with that responsibility. You're giving that part of you the opportunity to relax, rest, chill, and not feel like everything is down to you to be in control of or to sort through. There are so many people that feel that the family they were raised in expected specific things of them or always thought about them in a very specific way, so that they weren't able to be dynamic and nuanced and multifaceted. They always felt like they had to be set in this very rigid sort of role, and they couldn't deviate from that. And in that sense, reparenting is great, because whereas with your actual parenting that you experienced, you may have experienced the same message over and over again, of being, the good child, the perfect one, or being the scapegoat, the black sheep, the inconvenience, just whatever it was that you feel you were typecast as, whatever it was that you were told you had to be. When you reparent, you're actually saying to that younger version of yourself, you can be who you want and you can be in the fullness of yourself. It's okay to experience all of your emotions. It's okay to show all of the different parts of your personality. So you are reassuring as you are reparenting. You're saying, it's okay, honey, you show me who you are, tell me what you want, tell me what you feel, instead of, the original parenting, which was very much in favor of kind of like putting you in a box and making you stay there. Some of the people I work with who are going through reparenting and inner child work had a specific situation in their life that wasn't dealt with very well by the adults around them. Maybe the adults needed lots of support, and so they actually ended up not getting support. Maybe the adults reacted from their own triggers and fears and ended up making this young child feel shamed, So that young child then grows up, and there's a lot of sort of knotted, wounded tissue in the psyche around that specific event and the memories of that event. So sometimes the reparenting is about going back to that event or to the age that somebody was when that event occurred and giving a different reparenting or giving a different parenting experience, So say, for example, that at a specific time in your life, you really needed to be listened to, you needed to have space held, you needed support, you needed the adults to be there for you, and they were not. Part of your reparenting process would be to really go to that part in the psyche and say, tell me how you feel, I've got all the time for you, what do you need? And really sort of give yourself that part of you inside that is in need, whatever it is that part of you is craving. Lots of people are reparenting themselves because they picked up habits during their upbringing that are really not indicative of who they are as people, and they do not want to exhibit those habits anymore. And sometimes it's judgments, sometimes our parents or our wider family circle deliver to us their judgments, and we take those judgments on as our own: cultural judgments, political judgments, religious judgments, and we want to drop those. And for that, reparenting is obviously something that would seem quite sensible. The idea that you can go in to those parts of the psyche where that conditioning was very strong and say, no, you don't have to think that. That's not a foregone conclusion. There are other ways of looking at it. You are free to feel in to how you feel and consider what you think. You do not have to just follow this, So it's really about going in and giving a different message. It's about that part of your psyche hearing a different kind of voice of authority. And the voice of authority is your own. You are now the parent. Another thing I've noticed with people who are reparenting the inner child or reparenting various different former selves is people that were not allowed to experience or express certain emotions. So for instance, households where anger was forbidden. It just really wasn't cool to showcase anger, and you would get into a lot of trouble for showcasing anger. Or indeed households where only one member of the household was allowed to exhibit anger. So maybe there was a fiery, very, very ill-tempered father and everybody else was just like sort of eggshell creeping all the time. If those experiences were a part of your life tapestry, then you may want to reparent yourself to recognize that anger is okay. You may need your voice of parental authority to be a voice that says it's okay to be angry. It's okay to feel that feeling. It's okay to go through the motions of that. It's okay to express that, you know? Likewise with anything else, basically fear. If you weren't allowed to feel fear, if you weren't allowed to express sadness, if you weren't allowed to be happy and gregarious and extroverted, and if you were shamed for that, then reparenting is obviously a sensible thing to consider in your self-development journey, of course, because you're parenting yourself to recognize that there's no shame in those things. And as I said at the beginning, it might be that the current version of you knows that there's no shame in those things. But it's not about that current version of you at the age you are now. It's about the fact that there are different selves operating with different agendas and different fears and a different sense of what is possible. And that is why, as the current version of yourself, you begin to go in and reparent, because you recognize, okay, sometimes I'm sort of dealing with a 7-year-old version of me or a 12-year-old version of me, and it's not going to be good enough just to tell them, it's okay, do what you want, it's okay, you don't have to do it that way, because they don't believe me. You know, in that part of me, I'm still under the tyranny of the household. I'm still being directed by my parents, who are saying no to me or making me fearful or whatever. So you really have to go on a negotiation process with those younger versions of self, and it is a very interesting and very freeing, liberating, beautiful thing to consider. One other thing I want to say before I get into some of the ways in which I feel I've done some successful reparenting is that reparenting, in my opinion, it's not really about your parents at all. It's about you. So some people might be worried about focusing on reparenting because they do not want to sit in judgment of their parents. Maybe you're listening to this video and you're thinking, okay, my parents definitely could have done a better job. Their parenting left a lot to be desired. However, I understand why they botched it. I understand why it was difficult. They came from difficult backgrounds themselves. They were really up against a lot of difficulty. Who am I to sit in judgment? Who am I to say that I would have done a superior job myself in those circumstances? And I think a lot of people feel very guilty for highlighting, even in their own mind, without speaking it to anybody else, but highlighting for themselves where their parents fell down so spectacularly. I can definitely understand why that might be a worry for people. From my perspective, though, I don't think it has to be about doing a deep dive into your parents' motivations, or, you know, whether or not they had a right to do things in the certain ways that they did them, whether or not you forgive them for that, whether or not you can move past it, whether or not you will talk to them if you have the opportunity to do so. You don't have to really be doing any of that work to reparent. You can simply decide that you're going to go on an exploration to decide how you are going to be your caregiver to your younger selves in this moment now. And no matter where you are on the journey of figuring out how you feel about your parental caregivers, what kind of relationship you want to have with them, if you can have a relationship with them, if you're in therapy about that, or whatever it might be, that's okay. I think any stage of the journey where you are with that can be separate to the reparenting techniques that I'm going to be talking about now. So yeah, I suppose what I'm trying to say is I didn't feel when I first started looking at reparenting that I had to get absolutely right and be totally at peace with how I felt about my mum and my dad and my stepdad and my stepmom and everything that they brought to the equation and the whole shebang. I didn't tell myself, okay, now I need to figure all of that out before I start reparenting. It was a separate thing. It felt to me like a separate journey where I was like, okay, wherever I am with my actual living parental figures that I had, that's fine. But this is something that I can do regardless, because this is just me deciding that I'm taking responsibility for parenting myself now, for parenting this gaggle of selves that are experiencing pain and causing issues and jostling for position and trying to fulfill their agendas. I am now going to be the caretaker. I commit myself to shepherding this little herd of Kellyannes and coming to understand what it is that is an issue for them and what they need and how I can be of service. So as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, the thing that sort of came to me that made me go on my inner child journey and my reparenting journey is recognizing that there are certain aspects of me that are very much tethered to specific ages and specific times in my life in the past. And those aspects of me can be very influential when they come up. They can be very problematic when they come up. They can be troublesome. They can cause mischief for me. And it was really recognizing that, like, oh, okay, these parts of me seem to be more connected to other ages, and they seem to be very influenced by specific things that happened or specific times in my life. They don't have really that much bearing on what I think of myself now or what my motivations are now. But when a particular former aspect of me is in the driver's seat, it can really overtake and it can be kind of overwhelming. So that realization led me to where I am now in my mid-30s, where I would say that my whole process is just a lot more self-aware and a lot more sophisticated than it was at the beginning. In fact, one of the techniques that I feel has been really useful for me with reparenting is starting to really build up stronger profiles of the different key ages that I recognize that I tend to operate from. And again, just for people that are really not that sure about inner child work or working with former versions of self, I am not saying that I regress to the age of a 6-year-old and start talking like a 6-year-old and start thinking that I'm a 6-year-old. I'm not saying that. I always am the age that I am, you know, in my mentality and in my sense of who I am as a person. But what I'm saying is that I noticed that the motivations that were very important to me when I was young, because of the conditioning I was experiencing, because of the family that I was in, those motivations in certain situations take over. And I can usually see why they're taking over. For example, earlier when I mentioned my 15-year-old self, who is very sort of, can be defensive, can lash out. She wants to put the boot in before you do. She's very concerned with safety and with shutting off and with knowing that she's okay in her surroundings and in her body. When that version of me comes through, I can usually see why. There's usually been something that's happened, something that somebody has said, a way that a situation has made me feel. And instead of rationalizing what is going on and what the next right action is going to be, as the current version of me, I can switch into having the agenda and the motivation that I would have had when I was 15, which would have been like, try me, bitch. Like, I would be very, it was a fight or flight thing, and fight would win, and I would get very angry and I'd bare my teeth basically, and I would feel the sense of adrenaline running through me and the feeling that I had to do something to protect myself and that I wasn't okay. So I can normally see why that would come up. And nowadays, because I've got a really strong profile of that part of me, I understand when she arises, what she needs, and I understand what she wasn't getting when I actually was 15. And this is where I'm going to start to get emotional. Building those strong profiles of those former selves, knowing why they would arise, why do they come in, why do I start to switch to their motivations, their fears, their sense of what the next right action should be. Knowing that and having a strong sense of what those parts of me need when they are calling out for something has been game-changing and life-altering, darlings. It really has. It gives you such a stronger sense of who you are and why you're doing what you're doing at any given moment. It's such important work. And am I saying that it's a perfect science for me? Am I saying that I always manage to identify when I am operating more with the agenda of a former version of me and I do the right thing for myself in every given moment? No. But it's, when you agree to parent yourself, you are agreeing to be a parent, not a perfect human being. As I said earlier, parents, even the very best parents, they're not perfect, and no child comes out with an instruction manual tied to their umbilical cord. We do the best we can with what we have. And as a parent of myself, I do not pressure myself to reach perfection. That's not something I'm trying to attain. I know that I'm doing the best I can with the resources that I have, and I'm a better parent to my former selves now, to my whole self now, with all of its different aspects than I have previously been. I learn all the time. I learn all the time strategies for being my own parent. Have a go at building your profiles on the different selves inside of you that you notice coming through, especially the ones that, for the purpose of this video, especially the ones that are affected by various parts of your childhood or your adolescence, previous experiences that you had. Do you know that there are certain aspects of you that are very connected to a specific age or a specific time in your life, and you notice that the agenda of that part of you is usually different, or it usually clashes with what is going on in the current version of you? If so, build up a profile on that aspect of you that comes in. Give it a pet name if you want. Give it a name that's that sort of differentiates it, or give it a visual. I don't have names for some of these former versions of me, for example, the 15-year-old me and the 6-year-old me, but I do have strong visuals of what they look like. The 6-year-old me is wearing a white sort of tutu fairy ballerina leotard thing with silver sequins on it. And that's because I have a specific memory of having that piece of attire when I was very young, and running around my dad's flat in it with a fairy wand during a party. And the 15-year-old version of me is wearing a Nirvana top that I still have and a skirt with lots of ring pulls safety pinned to it. Don't ask, all right? It was a radical time for me style-wise. But yeah, I have specific versions of me in my head. Usually it's relating to clothing because that's a very strong memory for me, but it could be music for you, it could be anything. There's also a very young version of me that sometimes comes through, or I sometimes get the energy of, or the motivation of, and she's young. There's actually a picture of me at the first house that I lived in as a child, wearing a set of dungarees and a specific pair of shoes in the front garden, and I think of that picture when I'm sort of dealing with her. She doesn't come up very much in my motivations and my way of seeing things, but sometimes she does. That I sort of, for me, it's about imagery, and it's about clothing. It's about remembering myself wearing different types of clothing. There's also an adult version of me, past version of me, that I deal with from my 20s when I went through a really heinous breakup. And I think of her as kitchen floor Kelly, because I remember just sinking to the kitchen floor and like holding myself in the fetal position and sobbing my heart out. And I was going through a really specific, very painful thing. And sometimes I'm drawn back to that version of me that worries about the things I was worrying about when I was on the kitchen floor. And so I feel that version of me come up, and I lock in, and I'm like, okay, this is kitchen floor Kelly. This is kitchen floor Kelly, where you thought you'd lost everything and you were never going to find yourself again. And it's okay. You are just operating from that space. You're having a strong trigger, and it's okay. And I'll do for kitchen floor Kelly what I'm sure kitchen floor Kelly wished somebody would come in and do for her at the time. But I do it for her. I talk to her. I tell her it's okay. I put the kettle on. So English right now. But yeah. That's how that goes. Try writing a mission statement. That's something that I have done a couple of times, at least twice actually. A mission statement for me as a parent. So when I decided, okay, I'm my parent now. I'm going to be taking care of these versions of me when they come through. I am the one that is going to assure them that this is going to be the next right action. And it might be very different to what they were told at that, when I was that age, but that's the reparenting process. And once I decided to take that commitment seriously, I took the time to write down what my mission statement was and what my responsibilities are as a parent to myself. When I see these versions of myself come through, how am I going to shape the experience for me differently, or give myself access to messages that were vastly different from the ones I experienced at the time, so I can help myself go in a different direction, so I can help myself heal faster or do the right thing for myself, more consistently. One of the most important things for me with reparenting, and something that I would always write in any kind of like mission statement or manifesto, is that I trust myself and I give myself permission. It is no longer the role of any of the people that raised me to have a say in what happens next in my life, or to keep shepherding me in any particular way. It's my role now. I'm a fully fledged adult. So it's really about trusting myself to be a parent, knowing that it's not going to be perfect when I'm reparenting, when I'm trying to sort of shepherd these younger versions of me in a different direction. It's not going to be a perfect science, but I give myself permission to do it and to own it and to know what is best for myself. Because if I look back at some of the times in my life where I was lacking something from my parental caregivers, or even from the world around me, I know what that thing was. I know. I'm sure if you look back at your childhood and you see, for instance, a time where you really needed the adult caregiver to take control, be in charge, set boundaries for you, show you that you were loved, take care of you more, not be absent or whatever, you know that that was what was needed. You know how you wish your parent would have acted. You know what it is that would have been nurturing for you. You can pretty much tell. You know what you were lacking. You know what was missing. You know what you always wished your parental caregiver would fucking give you, you know? And so that means you know what to give to yourself now as the parent of yourselves. You know what was lacking that is needed now. Journaling is just always incredible for everything. I never have my journal very far away. In fact, it's right here by my phone right now as I'm filming with my very stuffed pencil case, stuffed as always. And this is definitely something that my 6-year-old self demands of me and requires me to upkeep. Okay, I need a stuffed pencil case. Yeah, journaling is incredible just for writing down when you have observed a specific form or version of yourself coming in. What happened? How did you reparent? What could you do better for next time? What did you learn during the experience? Also in your journal, you can write letters to the former versions of yourself. You can reassure those versions of yourself through those letters, you know, and you can even give a former version of yourself just a very nurturing therapeutic experience through journaling alone. The 15-year-old version of me loves nothing more than to just hole up with a good album and just write. And so she gets a lot of comfort from this. When she's rattled, when she's tense, she doesn't want to go to anybody else. She doesn't want to talk about it. She doesn't want anybody around her. She wants to be alone with her pens and her paper behind preferably a locked door. So yeah, so she gets tremendous comfort from this anyway, you know. In fact, I probably have stopped my inner 15-year-old from playing up and acting out many times just through maintaining a pretty regular journaling practice my whole life long. I perform ritual to celebrate wins in my reparenting process. I love to perform ritual to invite my inner child and the different versions of myself that I've been along the way to come in, take up space, tell me what they need, help me to learn about them. I honour all the versions of myself that I've been. I honour everywhere that I've been and everything that I've experienced and all the different sort of psycho-spiritual eyes that I have seen through, if you will. And so ritual can be a really good time to just affirm what I'm learning and to affirm the forward motion that I'm experiencing in my personal development journey, and to really celebrate what I have understood and to celebrate my wins and to celebrate how reparenting is going well and how it's served me. So ritual can be a great way to bring something that is an internal knowing into the external reality, so you can really set fire to the posh hammer, as they say in the Mighty Boosh. It really does do the trick. It sort of just really gives the right tone. It sort of puts the nail on the head. It crosses the T's and dots the I's, as they say. It makes a fucking meal of it. Ritual is so potent. I must do a video about ritual. I must do a dedicated video about ritual. But yeah, that's something that I have done quite a few times. I have celebrated in ritual some of the key versions of myself at different ages that have really needed my nurturing and my recognition and my understanding. And I have recognized as well quite a few times when a specific version of myself, a specific part of my inner child or inner adolescent is coming through a lot and wants my attention and wants to be recognized and noticed. And if I've been suppressing that version of me, if I've been pushing her down, if I've been pushing her away, the ritual space can be a great time to just actually have the space in front of me and have, you know, the stones and the cards and the candles and the incense, and just to say, okay, I'm ready. I notice that you are on the periphery. I welcome you into the space. And I just sit with that energy, that really potent energy of a fragment of my psyche that is asking for my attention. And I might write, I might do some channeled writing, I might do some art, I might just meditate, I might cry, I might feel moved to get up and dance around, put some music on. You know, it might be any number of things. I've even found myself reaching for my laptop and researching things that I used to enjoy researching at the specific age of the psyche fragment that's coming through. That was really interesting. In fact, I remember this one specific time in the ritual space where I had really strong memories of a particular summer with my first very best friend that I had ever. And I remember spending the whole of the Easter holiday every single night at her house and just talking with her and making art and listening to Pablo Honey by Radiohead and Beautiful Freak by Eels on repeat and on repeat. We loved those albums. And I was like, oh my God, I was reaching for my laptop and I was researching things we used to talk about and playing those albums. And even that is just a really beautiful way of saying to a part of yourself that's been out in the cold and might have needed something, like, hey, I'm with you. I'm interested in what you're interested in. I still get you. I still love you across time and space. And if you need me, darling, I'm here. You know? Whew, it's getting emotional. Okay, so further to that, it can be good to have a specific day that is dedicated to a certain former version of yourself. Lots of people do this when they have an inner child day. You will hear people talking about this, and I certainly have done it myself. In fact, I'm planning an inner child day fairly soon, and it is going to consist of colouring in and painting, sitting with all my stuffies. I love stuffed animals, stuffed toys and stuff like that, with a blanket and watching cartoons. I love Powerpuff Girls. I did not watch Powerpuff Girls as a child. It came out after I was a child, but it sort of feeds the inner child in me. I love Powerpuff Girls, so I've got season 1 of Powerpuff Girls, and yeah, I'm just gonna get into some comfy clothes and make some art and put Powerpuff on and have sweets. And yeah, just basically no responsibility, no emails, no nothing like that. Just really let myself get into some of the most joyful sort of parts of being that age and being blissfully unaware for any time that I was of the big existentialist things. And just, yeah, it's just kind of like a really sweet, delicious, conscious, healthy numbing out. I can describe it as that, I suppose. Yeah, might try on some clothes and accessories as well, and different shoes, because I used to love doing that when I was a kid. Granted, I used to raid my nana's wardrobe a lot, or put my mum's clothes on and stuff, but now I've got a big gigantic collection of my own, and I just love to have the time to be able to go through and mix and match and make outfits. I was raised with a younger sister that was only 15 months younger than me. We were so close in age that we used to get mistaken for twins. And so I never grew up having my own space. We always shared a room, we always shared toys, and I always felt like I just had this other person there all the time. So it was when she moved out of the family home when I was a teenager and I got my own room for the first time. That was wild, and wow, it was a whole new ball game. And you know, when I was younger, being able to just spend time dressing up and things like that, I always was in play with this other person. There was always this other person there, and it was about her motivations as well and what she wanted and whether or not we were getting on and whether or not we could really enjoy the time together. Or were we being mean to each other? Were we being surly towards each other? Was she taking the piss out of me or whatever? So yeah, it's there's something really beautiful for me about being able to give my inner child, my inner younger self, who was always with her sister, this quality time, just me. And it taps me into memories of the only quality time I would get with my mother when I was a kid was when I would get really bad tonsillitis and I'd have to stay home from school. And that happened twice a year, once every summer and once every winter. For a few years I would get tonsillitis and my mum would have to stay home and take care of me. Yeah, that was the only time I got without my sister, without my stepdad around, just me and my mum, and it was heaven. Even though I could barely breathe and my throat was swollen and I could barely talk, I was with my mum, just me and her. And that's kind of a similar feeling that I get now when I give myself an inner child day. It's like I am my mum and I'm me, and I just give myself everything that I could possibly want. You can give yourself a day at any age. If you, like me, have a surly 15-year-old inside you that needs some attention and, you know, needs the things that they couldn't access then, give your inner 15-year-old a day to do that. If your inner 15-year-old wants to go vintage shopping or wants to read books all day, or wants to watch scary films, or whatever. Let that version of you do whatever they want to do. If you need to go back and give yourself a different experience where there wasn't religious oppression, or where there wasn't, the need for you to force yourself into a specific gender, or hide your sexuality, or be inauthentic in some way, mold yourself into a different shape so you could belong in the family. If you want to go back and parent yourself in a way that lets you be in your fullness at a certain age, do that. If you were never allowed to dress like a metalhead, but you really were, let yourself dress like a metalhead now. Get yourself a dog collar and put it on whenever you want to go back to that age. So these kinds of things. Paint your nails black. Listen to the music you weren't allowed to fucking listen to in your household when you were a teenager. Reparenting is about saying, you know what? I give permission to myself at this age, frozen in the amber of my life story. I give permission for that version of me to have access to something that they couldn't access at the time. And it's going to be glorious. Another thing that I do that has been really helpful for my reparenting and my inner child work is working with a specific poppet that I use to represent myself as a baby. I'm going to leave a video down below that will that is about poppets, and one of the things I talk about in there is how I use one of my poppets for inner child work, and that can be really, really useful. So I will leave you to watch that video if you want to learn more about that technique. And I will also, as I said, leave down below some other, I think I said this anyway, I'll leave down below links to other videos where I've talked about inner child work on the channel in the past. There's a couple of things I just want to mention before I round off, and they're kind of like important reminders for this work. First of all, I think that with parenting, it's always better to acknowledge that you are not perfect as a parent and that you're going to get it wrong. And I think it's a really good thing when a parent sort of levels with their child, apologizes for what didn't go quite right, and makes amends. And we can do that when we are reparenting our inner former selves as well. You can apologize, you can explain, and you can decide that you're going to learn from it. So at times where my inner 6-year-old has been very sort of demanding or very concerned about something, and I have shoved her away or been embarrassed by her or been like, oh God, no, not that part of me, not that part of me. I may later choose to apologise to that part of me and say, I'm sorry I rushed you, I'm sorry I was embarrassed by you, I'm sorry I didn't let you say what you had to say. I understand your motivations, I understand what you needed. I've done the same. I've done that quite a few times with my 15-year-old self. Whenever those motivations and those fears come in and I've been angry with that part of me, I have later said, I'm sorry. I didn't deal with that as I should have done. I shouldn't have shit talked you. But sometimes you can be a pain in my ass. There's always good reasons to have your former selves, your inner children around. They are magical, but they also can really frustrate you. And like with all parents, you can get frustrated and you can say things you don't mean or be too harsh, and that happens with yourselves as well inside, I think. Apologize, make amends, recognize that, like, you know what, that came up and I didn't actually deal with it well. I was frustrated with myself, or with that part of me, and I'm sorry. I'm sorry I dealt with it that way. I also want to say, don't be ashamed of this work. It's not for everybody. It's not the way everybody sees things. It's not the way everybody does things. Some people might find it silly. Some people might find it weird. Fine. I mean, congratulations to them. That's okay. That whatever they see as being acceptable or not for their own journey. But for me, it's certainly been part of what saved my life. It's been really life affirming and important and hopeful and beautiful for me. And I know for a lot of people that I've had the pleasure of speaking with as audience members or as clients of mine. So don't be ashamed of it. It's certainly something that a lot of people talk about and experience and read about and write about and everything else. So if you recognize that this is part of how you want to work on your journey of healing and self-development, you are a long, long, long way from being alone. So I wanted to make that I wanted to make that clear as well. Darlings, this has been my epic exploration of the theme of reparenting as it relates to inner child work. Thank you so much for coming with me on this journey. Please leave your comments down below. I want to know from you, do you do reparenting work? Are you interested in the concept of the inner child? All that good stuff. And what have you realized about your own journey in that regard? You can follow me on my social media platforms. I will leave all of the links down below. My online store is open. You can purchase mentoring sessions with me, counseling sessions. There are tarot readings, card readings there, and other things as well. So please do go over and check it out, and you can get into my schedule and work with me. If you found this video helpful, please click the like button so that the algorithm gods will favor me. Subscribe if you're not already subscribed. And there are loads of playlists and tons of videos around. If you would like to binge watch me, feel free, sweetheart. And until next time, much love and blessed be.